Myra Goldberg, Executive Director of the Art Students League. Welcome, one and all. Last Saturday, I had the pleasure of seeing the exhibition called Hudson River Contemporary Works on Paper at Boscobel House and Gardens in Garrison, New York. And I must congratulate the co-curators James McElhinney and Katherine Manthorne for assembling a remarkable group of recently created pictures. We often think of the Hudson River artistically within the context of the group of artists that bore its name as a moniker for its 19th century aesthetic movement. But as this exhibition beautifully demonstrates, the Hudson has never ceased to be a muse for artists, and the river, along with its often lush surroundings, continues to inspire us today. This is a show that bears no aesthetic agenda. Its theme holds only two key consistent factors: its subject matter and the quality of the art. Everything else reflects the unique and individual perception of each artist and their love of the subject, as well as the limitless and enduring power of well-crafted art. Hats off to all the participants and everyone who contributed to this exhibition, and I look forward to a lively discussion this evening. I want to welcome all the panelists. And now, I'd like to introduce James McElhinney to begin the proceedings.
I'd like to welcome everybody. We have a very distinguished roster of speakers, and hopefully we will get through the program on time. I wanted to just call your attention before we begin to index cards that are attached to your, shall we call them playbill equivalents, that are on your seats. These are for your use in writing questions which you may address to the panel. I would ask that if you wish to have your question asked during the Q&A process, that you identify yourself, the name of the panelist whom you would like to address or to inquire, and one question. And at the end of the program, the index cards will come forward and we will get to as many of them as we can in due course. So this is what the index cards are for. If you need a pencil or a pen or any help at all, we have two assistants in the room. We have Bree Lehman, would you stand up? And we have Chelsea Cooksey. And they will be collecting these cards at the end of the program. Okay, to begin the program, I would like to introduce Dr. Katherine Manthorne, who is professor of art history at the CUNY Graduate Center and who teaches in the doctoral art history program there. She has a long and distinguished career writing about artists like Frederick Church, the Argentine painter Blanes, a lot of other landscape artists, including Louis Remy Mignot, and recently she was a guest curator at the National Academy of Design for a show called Luminous Horizon, the life and collection of James A. Sudan. I would like to introduce Dr. Katherine Manthorne. It's always awkward introducing one's spouse in a program.
Oops, already. Yeah. Oh, there we go.
Well, that was on.
Okay, so you can see the title of my talk, Why Paint Landscape? The Two New York Schools. And what I thought would be fun to do would be to look at some of the 19th century Hudson River painters and to look at some of the artists who are in our exhibition up at Boscobel and think about some of the dynamics of then and now, if you will. Oops. Yeah, okay, thank you. So here you can see on the screen a work by Thomas Cole on the left, a very famous painting called the Oxbow, which is in the Metropolitan Museum. And I wanted to start with that one because in a way it sets up the dynamic. We tend to think of the 19th century painters as being realists, and on some level that is of course true, but in the case of Cole, he always had this tug between the real and the ideal, the imaginary and the observed. And you can see here in the Oxbow, it's very much about that. He's looking down on the river, which in his day at least had that configuration, but at the same time it's a synthetic work. He's combining different elements. This wasn't necessarily the weather he saw on that day, and also if you look over onto the far cliff, some people at least think they see Hebrew letters, which definitely were not on the cliff at the time. So you get a little bit of sense of this kind of combination. And of course, John Moore on the right, a contemporary artist who is also thinking in these terms. He certainly observes the motif, but then when he goes back to his studio and starts to work on his canvas, of course, there are these elements that are coming into play between the real and the ideal. And of course, part of this is based on the whole activity of outdoor painting. And here on the left you can see I'm just showing you a detail from the Cole painting where perhaps you can notice the umbrella is sticking up there and the artist is tucked among the foliage drawing from the motif. So this whole idea of showing the artist in the landscape, you know, actually painting on the spot, is it a way of giving him authority? It shows that he in fact went to this place and naturally carries a certain weight in terms of his observations. On the right you can see, I don't know if anyone recognizes this gentleman here, our moderator, painted actually by one of our speakers, James Kunstler. And I wanted to show that because of course here they are, you can see them, but at the same time it also shows this idea that when painters go out, oftentimes they would work with colleagues and they would make pictures of each other as a kind of way of suggesting this idea of art as a shared activity and the circle of artists to which they belong. The one in the center too is in our show. It's a little bit harder to see, but it's a pencil drawing by Sigmund Abeles of his son Max working at the easel, and you can see his face is contorted in his efforts. Trees, of course, this is the language of landscape painting, right? Trees, and you can see in the center Asher B. Durand, the king of tree painting. I like to think, I love the way Durand paints trees, but also some of the other artists in our exhibition. And again, you can see the specificity. You can recognize the beech tree, you can recognize the elm or the other specimens of trees. But at the same time, each artist has his or her own way of painting trees. So you can say, well, that's, you know, you can immediately recognize Durand's mode, or you can recognize Hatke's mode of painting these particular trees. So there's always this negotiation back and forth, of course, and that's one of the things that I think is so interesting. Looking at these artists working in 1850 and looking at these artists working, most of the works in our show are between 2000 and 2010, the last 10 years or so, many even the last couple of years. Some of the same ideas are still at work. Here, an artist I'm working on the left, Eliza Greatorex. In the 19th century, she was called the first artist of her sex in America. Now, be honest, how many people in the room have ever heard of Eliza Greatorex? I know a couple because my students are here and I torture them with her. But you know, she's not so very well known now. Hopefully she will be soon. But I'm comparing her to Sylvia Plimack-Mangold because you can see again the way in which foliage takes on a life of its own. Eliza was supposedly painting the house. She was making a record of this particular structure that was being torn down. But you can see in her case the foliage takes over. And I think because she thought of it as a kind of veil that suggested you were looking to the past. But Plimack-Mangold, you can see very kind of almost this, again, tension between realism and abstraction, creating this wonderful sense of color and light and design. Oops. Sorry. Here, I just thought this was an interesting comparison. One of the works in the exhibition by Carolyn Marks Blackwood, you can see she did this wonderful photograph of ice. And when I saw it, again, art historians can't help this. We look at pictures from the present, and in our mind, we go through the whole history of art, and we think of different comparisons. But you can see part of the reason that I wanted to show this Friedrich on the left was because Friedrich, working in the Northern Romantic tradition, working in Germany, again, a very important source for American artists past and present. We always tend to think of France, Paris, or people went to Italy, but Germany and the Northern Europe was a very important dimension of this tradition. Oh, sorry. It's either too hard or too soft. Anyway, so the next comparison here, again, flowing water. You think on the left of somebody like Frederick Church. He takes the subject of Niagara, which even when he painted it in 1857, already had a hundreds of year tradition. What was he going to do that was new? How was he going to make this thing exciting? Well, when this painting was exhibited in 1857, Church would hire a hall like this one. He would install his painting at the center of the room. He would have dramatic lighting. He would have pamphlets. You could buy a print of it, and you would see just this work. And when people saw this, they went crazy. They said, this is Niagara with the roar. All that's missing is the roar of the water. They just thought that this was, really bringing you to the edge of the Niagara Falls. And even when it went on a 10-city tour, again, Church, ka-cling, charging 25 cents every time somebody went through the door, of course, made a fair amount of money, but certainly gave people their money's worth because they found this very spectacular. So it went to London, and in London, the story goes, the art critic John Ruskin, seeing this little rainbow on the left on the painting, thought that some light was coming in through the window, so he went over and pulled over the curtain. So, again, there's these stories all through the history of art that, it's so true that, birds will fly into it, or, or Ruskin will think it's a real rainbow. But, that's what Church gave people. And here on the right, you can see I'm comparing it to Ruth Wetzel, who's here tonight, and her photographs of the waters of the Hudson and other bodies of water, and this whole idea of how do you capture this in art? I think it's very interesting. This is Don Stinson, who will be talking shortly, so I won't say much about this, except, of course, one can't help but think in terms of his Western landscape of the Thomas Moran. But again, to emphasize, bringing in things that are observable today. You can see in the case of the Stinson, the motif of some kind of trace of industry that is now, creeped into the Western landscape. Which, of course, Moran, even if he had seen such a thing, would not have included. Church's house, Olana, done in this watercolor on the right by Richard Haas, who's been very involved with the National Academy of Design, where, as he said, he partly took the job because of his relationship, historical relationship with Church. And on the left, I'm just showing you, I think many people in the room have perhaps visited Olana, his house up in Hudson, New York. But the top drawing, Church actually designed his own villa. This place. Originally, he was going to have a French chateau. It was being designed by Richard Morris Hunt, but then he took a trip to the Near East, and he fell in love with all the different motifs he saw there, and he sort of fired Hunt, and he designed some of his own motifs, and created this wonderful kind of Moorish villa, if you will. And when he was reporting to one of his friends about his house, he said, "A half an hour south of Albany is the center of the world. I own it." So it's a pretty interesting kind of idea that, first of all the places Church had gone to, and he still thinks a half an hour south of Albany is the center of the world. But secondly, the fact that he owns this property and is kind of traipsing around his own property doing images such as the one there. Luminous, Fitzhenry Lane in the 19th century, this kind of still, hushed creation of a mood in terms of the image on the left, and the new Luminists, as they call themselves, people like Stephen Hancock on the right. The conservationists. Now, if you take a close look for a second at Sanford Gifford's work, what would put this in the category of conservation? Anybody see any motifs? You can see those little stumps there, right? They look almost like stubble. Well, again, the 19th century language, when the artist showed a tree being blown down, it would be all, in rack and ruin. But when they show this kind of tree, it means that the axe cut it. And here you can see Aurora Robson at the top collects this material salvages it from the river, and on the bottom, the architecture of industry. And then I just wanted to show you Fidelia Bridges, 19th century artist who works in books. Sasha Chermayev on the right does this wonderful kind of, again, echoes of Japanese bookmaking and things. And in the center, Fern Apfel's work is not a book technically, but almost looks like a page out of a scrapbook. And finally, I wanted to end to bring us back to Boscobel. This is the view from the Belvedere there, and a work by the very modest James McElhinney sitting here. Thank you.
Get that off the screen. How do I get rid of it? Okay. I want to introduce next Gregory William Frux. He's a realist painter, trained originally as an architect, a mountain climber, world explorer, globe trekker, has worked in Arctic regions, in Moroccan deserts, and will now address you. Welcome.
When I was an art student, I was only dimly and gradually aware of the tradition of American landscape painting. It wasn't well taught in schools, and the discovery of it was a revelation for me, to be part of the heritage of that history of environmentalism and of the narratives of exploration. Among my heroes are, in the 19th century, Thomas Moran and Frederick Church, and in the 20th century, Rockwell Kent and Edward Hopper and Charles Birchfield. Just to speak for a moment about Church as a role model, he went out into remote locations and did some astounding field sketches. He went to Labrador, the icebergs off Labrador. He traveled in the Ecuadorian Andes, and those oil sketches are astounding. You can see them at the Cooper Hewitt by appointment. I've made it my business to go look at them. For his process, he synthesized those into large paintings, which I think a number of speakers are going to talk about. So for me, both aspects are an important part of my heritage, the careful observation and the synthesizing. So what I'm going to look at for a couple minutes is, in my own work, what parts of those traditions we continue and what has changed. This is Golden Canyon in Death Valley National Park. It's a painting that is based on a field sketch and then a lot of work in the studio. And it has an artist at work, an artist who likes to sit on the ground. And here, I'm not getting the traction. Great, I'll give you the high sign. Great. This is the sketch that I did on site, which was the basis for the larger painting. And I was thinking about, well, really it was only in this condition for an hour or so before the light changed. It's a Badlands at the bottom of Golden Canyon. We can go to the next slide. So for me, sometimes the oil sketch is the finished product. This was painted less than a month ago. It's White Canyon in a very remote part of Utah. So we can look at the beauty of the place itself, and I'm passionate about getting the representation right, getting the color right. But there can be, and for me there often are, layers of information which may be obvious, may not be obvious. In this case, this is part of 10 million acres of Utah wilderness which is federal land but not protected in any way, and there's a big struggle right now to protect this land that's been going on for about 25 years. And I will be working with the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance to use this painting to do some lobbying in Washington. We can go to the next slide. This is also in southern Utah. This is Comb Ridge, a formation that's about 800 feet high and 30 miles long. Spectacular feature. But if you look at this particular place, there's a notch in it, and that notch is a human-made excavation to allow Route 95 through. So we're not looking at the pristine landscapes of the 19th century. We're looking at human-modified landscapes, and that's important. That's where we are in the year 2011. And we can think about both the geology and the deep earth history here and the human history that overlays it. We can go to the next slide. As 21st century artists, we can travel further. We have more resources to muster than anyone has had in the past. It's an extraordinary thing. This is a painting of the extraordinary landforms of Peru's Cordillera Blanca, which is the highest group of mountains outside of Asia. The notch through it is a quebrada. It's a 3,000-foot deep canyon. Who wouldn't want to paint in a place like this? I mean, what a place to do an oil sketch. But beyond that, there's a history. There's the geologic history. It's one of the places in the world with the fastest uplift. It's an area of massive earthquakes. And you can go to the next slide. This is another painting from that same mountain range, and we can look at this landscape for its intrinsic beauty and profound beauty to me, but we can also think about that these equatorial glaciers are shrinking more rapidly than any other ice fields in the world, and they've already profoundly affected the people that live below these mountains. Next slide. I had the good fortune to go to Antarctica, and this was painted in the South Shetland Islands off the Antarctic Peninsula. Well, this is a oil painting based on a sketch I did on site. So I'm, of course, completely interested in the extraordinary and unusual light of the polar regions, and that's a topic unto itself. But we can also think about what it means for us as humans to go down to Antarctica for recreation, for the beauty, and there's more to be said on that, but I will leave that for you to fill in. Next slide. Nature's everywhere. A good portion of my work is in New York City. I'm particularly interested in landscapes that are edge conditions, places where nature is returning in some way. Fishermen at the southern tip of the Battery. It's a friend of mine sea kayaking off Newtown Creek, looking at Manhattan. And lest we forget, we're not separate from nature. We're connected. Next slide. So, here we are in Death Valley. It's a place of extraordinary scale. The left-hand image is looking from Badwater, which is the lowest point in North America, up to Telescope Peak, which is 11,000 feet, so you have a vertical relief of more than 2 miles. It's at the edge of the basin and range terrain. It's one of the most dramatic topographies in North America. And you can be broiling at the bottom and see the snow at the top. And lest we forget humans, there is an SUV with its hood up in the bottom on the salt playa and a tiny figure walking away. Now, the painting on the right reflects something I saw in a remote area of Death Valley. When it was made into a national park, the military reserved the right to continue to fly low-altitude training missions, and the jets can be down to about 300 feet. It was an experience of being both horrified and astounded and thrilled by being buzzed by jets flying down this canyon. So this painting was done, of course, partly from oil sketches and partly from studies. And I think it gives you something of the dialectic that we painters have to wrestle with, we landscape painters, and I think that's a good place to leave it. Thank you.
Our next speaker is actually a person who studied at the League a few years ago, and who is the recipient of the George Gross Memorial Scholarship here, and is also an alumna of Syracuse University, and lives and works in Columbia County, New York, and has been the recipient of a number of prizes and awards, and is one of the featured artists in the exhibition about which Ira spoke at Boscobel House and Garden. So I'd like to welcome Linda Cross.